BBOR, Black Box Online Radio. Did it surprise anyone else about how randomly that they really gave a large push to the alt-right movement back in January of 2017? It was almost like this was something that was ongoing. No one denies that. There was an alt-right movement before 2017, but the first time that many people really heard about this was because of the publicity surrounding Steve Bannon when Donald Trump announced that he was going to be appointed as the chief strategist to the White House. And it was at that moment that they started really trying to build up some sort of Nazi connection to Steve Bannon. And that is something that what we have on the alt-right. Now, what we have on the alt-left now in September of 2017, and it's been going on for August and July, we really have this uprising of the Antifa on the alt-left movement about the people dressed in bandanas, rioting in the streets, banging plastic drums, shouting anti-fascist battle cries as part of some sort of alt-left. Where was the alt-left before 2017? When did they get that name? When did they start calling themselves that? I do not disagree that there were protesters and there were demonstrators who had these sort of mannerisms and this sort of lifestyle and this sort of promotion. We can see some videos of them at UC Berkeley prior to 2017, and we of course see some in Seattle as well, some very similar things. However, does anyone else believe that there was just an enormous push by the mainstream media to promote these definitions of alt-right and alt-left to try and keep the Americans divided? It feels like the conservative versus liberal, the left versus right narrative was not selling anymore, because after talking to hundreds of Americans that you just know in your personal life, you start to hear that some people are liberal and some people are conservative, but you still sort of find some common ground. You still sort of find some way to have intelligent conversations with people who think differently than you. Then, on the other hand, you have the sort of you have the left versus right in a way that can be understood. And you look at your Facebook page and you will see the conservative, you will see the liberal, and you will find that there is some humor in it, or you will find that there is some benefit to what both sides are saying. And even as we look at the words of Tomi Lahren, that the millennials are not using the labels anymore. And that is one of the very important things, that people just don't care about this sort of terminology anymore. And from that moment, we saw a very large push to promote the alt-right movement. They were everywhere in the mainstream media after first the Trump victory in November, and of course in the inauguration in January, and of course so many discussions about Steve Bannon. Of course, SNL had him portrayed by something similar to the Grim Reaper or a skeleton in a black costume, whatever the hell that was. On the other hand, you have the alt-left, who are a bunch of violent protesters in the streets, wearing bandanas and just shouting and screaming and making obnoxious statements. And does anyone else think that this is a fabrication? Does anyone else think that Steve Bannon was never actually a Nazi, and that they just made up this story to try and get a bunch of press for the alt-right movement to create further divisions among the American people? Steve Bannon was a Hollywood financier. He makes money off of Seinfeld even to this day. He was one of the financial backers behind the show, and he's still making money when they air the reruns. He makes royalties off of this. So that's a show that was produced by a Jewish producer and stars a Jewish comedian in the leading role. Is he really a Nazi? And not only that, Steve Bannon also worked for Goldman Sachs. How are you going to be a Nazi if you work at Goldman Sachs? How are you going to be a Nazi if you work in investment banking? Really? Is that even possible? Would I think that Steve Bannon is going along with this narrative? Absolutely. Do I think he's enjoying the press? Absolutely. Do I think it is a pure fiction? Yes. It is most likely something that they just created as a sort of overdrawn publicity stunt to just sort of divide the American people even more. The left versus right narrative wasn't selling, so they went with the alt-left versus the alt-right. Why would they want to do this? For the sole fact that Washington, D.C. benefits from gridlock. Why do you think that our senators and our congressmen can never agree on anything? Because they benefit from the gridlock. You still have to spend money, but they don't want to pay you. You still have to spend money, but the situation never improves. You still have to spend money, but you're not going to be making any more. This is one of the largest tricks in the book that is used by sort of the ignorant senators and congressmen that we have in the Capitol, but also by the global financiers, by the people working in the financial industry, by the people working for the investment banks, such as Steve Bannon. So they created this sort of fictional alt-right versus alt-left narrative. No one was talking about the alt-left movement before 2017, and people are even posting on Facebook, what in the fuck is the alt-left movement? No one had ever really heard of that or had been using that terminology. Then we get to Charlottesville and we just have this massive division of America between what appeared to be alt-left versus alt-right, but in reality, it's the mainstream media that is promoting that terminology, and it is also the mainstream media that is trying to keep you divided. They're sort of sending out this sort of negative vibe across all of America. They're trying to push people into this alt-right direction or push people into this alt-left direction when the American people do not want to do that. The American people want to be together. They want to get together and watch football games and not have their newsfeed overblown with these comments and criticisms about national anthem protests. No, they just want to watch sports. The American people want to get together and go to a barbecue. The American people want to get together and just watch movies and laugh and have a good time and care about their families and take their dogs for a walk in the park and just live life and just make friends and have children and just be respectable human beings. This is what the American people want. But on the other hand, though, you just have so many people in power trying to just keep everyone divided more and more. Liberal versus conservative wasn't enough. Right versus left wasn't enough. Because we've had so many people over the years who are just sort of like, well, I'm kind of conservative and I'm kind of liberal. I mean, you can have the Rockefeller Republican model of someone who is fiscally conservative but socially liberal and maybe attempting to be moderate in personality, but that's another story. Or you can have someone who just says that they don't care about these labels. They don't want someone trying to use a single word to determine their entire identity because as human beings, we are very different and we are very complex. We have many ideas and we have many feelings. On some issues, people tend to be feeling in a more traditional sense, and on other issues, they are more progressive. And the labels don't really mean that much. And the American people caught on to this because perhaps of social media or perhaps the economy got better, so people started to not care about any of these sort of political divisions that they were trying to throw into us. But one of the things that they really needed to do was they needed to find a new way to keep people divided. So that is why the mainstream media, the financiers, and the sort of global elites that kind of work for the banking cartels came up with this very silly little plan. All right, now we're going to call it alt-right and alt-left. Alt-right and alt-left are fictional terms that no one was using before 2017, save a few, and they are just sort of ways that they are trying to hurt the American people. The alt-right movement was something that maybe perhaps began in a sort of genuine origins because, I mean, we do have a lot of videos of what was happening before 2017, but no one was talking about it. It was not till Steve Bannon that we actually had people get up there and make major criticisms about it or give it any sort of national attention, at least not to the way that it received after Steve Bannon. So we really have this Congress and we have this financial system that is not on the side of the people. And that is what we really need to change. We need someone in Congress, we need someone in the White House, and we need someone to try and change the rules for the benefit of the American people. And that sounds like an absolute far out ideal that will never come true. But remember the words of Dr. Ron Paul. If you want to have peace in the world, you have to strive toward the ideal, and you can't give up just because it's difficult. If you want to accomplish something, we do need to try our best. And if you fail, at least you try. And we need to try and promote the unity of the American people. We need to get beyond these silly little terms, especially ones that have been manufactured by the mainstream media and the people who are trying to sell you things but don't want to pay you. There is no alt-right, there is no alt-left. Those are silly terms that were manufactured as part of a political fiction to try and keep the American people divided. We do not need to be divisive right now. If we work together as the American people, we will be stronger. Unity is something that they do not want from us. They want Washington gridlock. They want you spending money, but they don't want you making more money. They want to keep you weak, and they want to keep you less powerful. And that is very sad. We would think that if both sides of the aisle are benefiting from something, that both sides of the aisle will want to try and help and improve human life for everyone. And it sounds so simple. But remember also, for there to be a rich, there must be a poor. And some people on one side do not want that to change. And I'm not talking about ambitious individuals. I'm not talking about entrepreneurs. I'm not talking about people with ideas. I'm talking about the rich elite families that made millions and billions centuries ago, and they are refusing to relinquish their financial and political power. So what do? They try and brainwash the general public with these silly terms such as alt-right, alt-left. Get people to go out and protest against the alt-right, or get people to go out and protest against the alt-left. Devote all their energy to political bickering and not using their energy for forming unity, to find solutions on how we can work together. Think about all the people that you know. You know people that are liberal. You know people that are conservative, and they can get along. They can share ideas. They can have reasonable discussions. They do not see eye to eye on every issue, but they can work together. They can find common ground because at the end of the day, they all care about America. They care about the planet Earth, and they care about their family members. This is not an overly complex idea or an overly complex situation. This is a bunch of people in power trying to create this narrative that will keep the Americans divided. Left versus right wasn't working. Conservative versus liberal wasn't working. Republican versus Democrat wasn't working. So a bunch of people sitting around a desk came up with the idea of promoting alt-right versus alt-left as a narrative to divide the American people in hopes that they could conquer us. But they will never do that because the American people have freedom on their side, the freedom to speak, the freedom to believe, the freedom to put what they choose in the press, and the freedom to petition the monolithic government and to petition and protest against the financial oligarchs who are trying to run the show. Who knows what's going to happen in 2018, but I hope there will be less division and more American unity.